the most dangerous time for a woman in a domestic violence relationship is when she leaves. It's surprising how little the legal system protects victims. One is the police sometimes arrest the wrong person.
A couple years ago, she finally told me that she got in a fight with her third husband. There was a claim on whether or not my mom used scissors on him or something, and they arrested my mom. She has her own trauma about having to deal with that. Welcome to A Holistic Dose, real talk from two 40-something-year-old unfiltered friends who've built businesses, found our glow up, and want to help you do the same. I'm Tiffany.
And I'm Jeanette. And before we jump into our topic, I want to go ahead and give you a trigger warning. Today, we will be talking about domestic violence and some SA, so just be prepared for that.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about, as Jeanette said, reclaiming yourself after domestic abuse and how to break the silence, or even if you should break the silence.
Yeah, so first we're both going to talk about our own experiences with domestic violence. Now mine, I'm fortunate that I have never been in a relationship with violence, or my close family members have not, but I do work as a family law attorney. And so, of course, I represent a lot of people who have domestic violence going on in their lives. And so my perspective and something that I can share with everyone is what it looks like legally, not to get into the weeds on the legal process, but it's surprising how little the legal system protects victims. And I see that come up very regularly. Here are a few examples of that. One is the police sometimes arrest the wrong person.
Yep.
And what I have personally seen happen is some police officers will determine who gets arrested by who has a wound or mark on their body. And I've seen a situation where a woman in self-defense, her ring or her fingernail has scratched the man.
Oh.
And bruises don't show up right away, right? So if she doesn't have any scratches or marks that show up right away, I have seen the perpetrator be the one who gets away with it and the woman actually get arrested. So that's frustrating. Wow. Police officers are often just not trained well when it comes to domestic violence. And that comes up in the Gabby Petito, like we watched that Gabby Petito documentary.
Plus also, I think that was a little bit, creating a profile or an image, right, of, this young couple and, it's just a little random argument, they're having.
Something else is the system is reactive and not proactive. And I see this come up all the time where a client, and I'll just say in my practice, because I have my own practice and I'm able to do this, I only represent the victim. I choose to not represent someone who potentially is the perpetrator. I will have clients who have a true, genuine reason to be fearful, and they are shocked when I tell them that is not enough to get a family violence protective order. There has to have been two things in Georgia. There has to have been the domestic violence. Okay. And of course, you have to be able to prove it. And that's such a huge problem, as he said, she said. What evidence do you have? Did you take pictures of the injuries? And this isn't fair, but did you file a police report? And it's extremely common to not do that. That is just, that's not what a lot of women do.
When somebody files a police report, does the other party have to know about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then that causes...
Exactly, which is why one of the reasons why a lot of women don't do it. And then in addition to having to prove the domestic violence occurred, in Georgia, the second part is you have to also prove that it's likely to happen again.
Oh, and how would you even do that?
Exactly. So it's completely up to whether or not the judge believes this is going to happen again.
Right, and this is coming from a judge who you're meeting them. Right? They don't know you, your background, anything.
You have maybe
biases made.
You have maybe an hour to put your evidence in front of a judge, and the judge has to decide, was there violence and is it likely to happen again?
Right.
So it's not always easy to get that protective order in place. And then once you get it, it is just a piece of paper. And the piece of paper Typically, it's a 12-month protective order in Georgia. But if someone really wants to hurt you and if they don't care about the
Oh, yeah.
consequences, it doesn't mean that much.
Right. And then if somebody doesn't have the support in their family or friends to go, and there's a lot of shame around it too.
Yeah. Yeah. And so a little bit later, we'll get into the specifics of,
Mm-hmm.
what to do to protect yourself. But tell us, Tiffany,
Yeah.
what are your personal experiences?
Yeah. So I'm thankful that I have not had, experiences with domestic abuse for myself. Have I witnessed a lot of it? Yes. Far more than I ever should have had. And this is because of growing up in a household with my mom for her second, third, fourth. I don't know how many other marriages there were during that time, but every partner that she was with, there was a codependent relationship there. There was drugs. There was abuse,
Physical abuse in every
physical.
single relationship?
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Verbally, physically, mentally, breaking things in the house, choking her. I've had to pull many men off of her, or not like, yes, actually, yes. And see and witness it. And then, which was an awful thing that I had to do then too, the next day with her second husband. He was like 21 years old and she was like 38, I think. That's a whole other story for another time. But then the next morning she would tell me to go tell him, because he had been drinking, why everything was broken in the house. And he would take like these halogen lamps and bend them over his knee and just break glass and dishes and everything. And I'm like, why is this my responsibility? I'm a child,
God, yeah.
And I was terrified. And to say, and I didn't even think about this until now, I'm getting upset, but to say that I was like 13 years old and I would used to think like, I can't be in this house anymore.
Yeah.
Like I considered like I had thoughts of suicide because it was that bad.
People often don't realize how much it affects the kids. And when at the beginning of my career, my job was representing the Department of Family and Children's Services. And kids are removed from their parents' homes for, it's called failure to protect from domestic violence.
Yep.
And that is something that people in a violent situation need to realize is it is traumatizing to children to see their parent suffer from violence.
Yeah.
And not doing something about it can lead to losing your children to the state.
Absolutely. And that was the reason why, one of the reasons why I was drawn to my now ex-husband, not because he was bad, but actually because he was so good. And I knew he came from a loving family and, I never had fear or worry that he was going to be an alcoholic or be into drugs or be abusive. And I experienced it so much. So that's another reason why, gosh, I didn't realize that I was going to get upset over this. But that's another reason why, like, just myself or my duty as a parent, and we talked about dating, in a recent episode too, and how we choose the right partner. I'm so hypersensitive to who I bring around my kids and who I introduce my daughter to, because I felt like my mom just every Tom, Dick, and Harry, married literally almost overnight, and brought into our house and our environment, and I never felt safe. And I do feel like as though, like we talked also about previous episode about, our weight and everything like that. I think being around so many different situations with men and not feeling safe, I think that was also a mechanism for keeping myself that way.
Yeah.
Now, again, thank God nothing ever happened to me or my sisters, but we were acting as, adults way sooner than we ever needed to.
Were the police ever called?
Yes, they were. I found out about a scenario when I had already moved out of the house, that my younger sister had to deal with, and I only learned about the details of it recently. Like a couple years ago, she finally told me. She said that, and I felt so bad because she was the last one there, and I always felt like I became the mom. The fact that she had to deal with this, that my mom got in a fight with with her third husband, I think it was, and I think there was a claim on whether or not my mom used scissors on him or something. And they arrested my mom. And my little sister had to go to court and basically
Oh, testify as to what she saw.
Yes. And she didn't have her glasses on at the time. And she's like, Tiffany, so she has her own trauma about having to deal with that too, you know, and she was in her early 20s, I think, at that point. So yeah, it, aside from that, I remember wanting to call myself, I wanted to call for help, but I didn't really know if that was going to help or anything, to be honest, to what your point, what you're saying. Yeah.
Other than that one situation, did she ever go get a protective order?
No, because she has a bleeding heart for people and thinking that people can change, and the codependency. And, you know, I really felt as though she leaned into us as her kids more than the men and thinking she could change them.
Yeah.
That would have been better, like a lot better, because the amount of things that we've seen and we're exposed to with drugs and violence and everything, it's bizarre.
And I think that's a really important message, is not repeating the pattern. Like in a
I'm
little bit,
hyper-focused to that.
yeah, like in a little bit, we're going to be talking about what are some steps to get out.
Yeah.
But if you're successful in getting out, be very careful about the signs. And there's a reason why every single man that your mom was in a relationship with was violent, right? And she was in a lot of relationships, right? We're not talking about 3 people.
No, it was at least 4 marriages that I know of. But then there was so many men in between at the dating and everything.
All of them were violent?
All of them, yes, to some degree. And they all had like substance abuse issues. And then she would always, you know, she would make excuses for them. I think that was the part, like as a kid, I was confused by. She would say like the third ex-husband, I think that was like bipolar. Oh, well, he just hasn't been on his medicine. So I'm like, okay. And I was young. I didn't really understand kind of any of that. And I'm like, why are you okay with this? You know?
Yeah. So it's a situation where...
Or it was like the alcoholic that it was like, oh, well, he was sexually abused as a kid. So does that mean it's okay for him to verbally and physically abuse you as an adult?
Yeah.
No.
That's really tough. So there's been a lot in the media and even in different TV shows. So let's talk a little bit just about what we've seen in the media about domestic violence, because it really does shape a lot of the conversation.
Yeah.
As far as celebrities, some of the like people that jump out are Tina Turner.
Oh, yeah.
Rihanna. And then there's the Sean Combs, or Diddy. Is he called Diddy now? So you've been following that a lot more than me. So tell us what's going on with that.
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of, with Cassie taking the stand, and the amount of things that she went through, and now what they're talking about, like, why was she okay with it at some points but not okay at other points? And there was emails saying that she wanted to be involved in these freak off parties and whatnot. And there was a reporter I listened to recently where she explained, a person can consent at any moment to any sexual act or any behavior until they say that they are not okay with it. So if they're okay with it even before anything begins, that's okay. But if something starts and they're not, they're not. So just because she might have been okay with things earlier on and then she felt trapped,
you can change your mind.
You can change your mind, and that doesn't mean that somebody can just proceed on with what they want to do with you.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a lot to even cover everything that she went through, but it's sad that so many people are having to question her, whether things happened or they didn't happen.
So I'm pretty clueless about celebrities. So Cassie Ventura, is she a celebrity on her own, or is she just known for this relationship?
Yeah, so she was an artist under his label. So she produced a couple albums there and then, entered into this relationship with him.
And then what did it turn into? Because I've never heard of her. So I'm assuming she didn't become huge.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with her either. I think that her personality and persona became, his partner, his girlfriend.
Okay.
And then we started picking up and seeing the clips that were happening that get captured on the news.
Now, I think that's an entirely different conversation too, is the power
There was a
differences.
big power difference there.
Yeah. And it also makes me think of like Harvey Weinstein, and now he's
Yeah.
more of essay.
Mm-hmm.
But something that really surprised me about that situation, and I think everybody, was how widespread it was.
Right.
And nobody talked about it. It was
Yeah.
known within these inner circles. So it's interesting how someone in a position of such power, I Diddy too, like
Yeah.
how there were, same thing, how widespread it was, how many people knew, and it's just now coming to light.
Exactly. So I did hear that, they would hire sex workers to go to the party, and they were, they knew what they were going there for, right? Because they were being paid for that. But they also stated that when they got there, they needed to give him their license, and he would take a picture of it. So it was definitely known that I'm in this position of power, and if you have anything to say about there's control over them.
Yeah. And then other situations we hear about, the big ones known for their murders were Gabby
Yeah.
Petito and Lacey Peterson
Yeah.
as well. And, those are just people that were too late. And we talk
Yeah.
about, how could those have been prevented. As far as fictional shows or things representing DV, there's 3 that I can think of. And actually, this one is actually about sexual assault and rape, but it's a mini series on Netflix called Unbelievable.
Yes.
And it's a girl who is raped and ends up recanting her story because of, I think it was the pressure the police put on her.
Yep.
And it really,
That was a tough one to watch.
I bet. And that one, and I think it's pretty realistic and shows the problems with the legal system and investigating these types of allegations and crimes. And another one is Made. Did you see Made?
I loved it.
And Made
watched
was
it
wonderful. And as someone who has represented women in violent situations, it seemed very realistic to me.
Oh, without a doubt. So I've had friends in my personal circle who've been in relationships that, weren't the best. And I think that a lot of people, everybody has a choice on what they decide, what they want to give up or not. And some things balance more than others. So I've seen where sometimes people prefer to have their picture perfect house and their life. And they think that, well, am I going to have to downsize to a condo? Well, I've been in a condo for 10 years, right? And I wasn't in that situation. What are they going to have to sacrifice? But I'm like, your health and you have a responsibility as a parent to show up for your kid and to protect your child too. So when I watch shows like that and the struggles that she went through, that's very real. And going to the women's shelters and really getting support and help. But a lot of the women who end up going there will end up going back to those relationships.
Yeah, and that was, I think, an important thing that was covered in that. Was that a show or a movie?
It was a series.
Was it a series? Was how common it is to go back to your abuser, and that typically once a woman finally leaves,
Yeah.
there have been previous times where she has tried.
Right.
And then one last show I could think of was Big Little Lies.
Yes. On
And
HBO.
yeah, and that one is different from Maid. Maid, she was in a low socioeconomic class. I think, did she live in a trailer? I'm pretty sure she lived in
Yes.
in a trailer and poverty. And it's kind of the opposite in Big Little Lies. Nicole Kidman plays, I think she was an attorney, but she just didn't work anymore. But she was very educated, very wealthy. And like you were talking about
yeah.
how you've had friends who had this picture perfect life, that showed domestic violence from a situation where they had this on the outside picture perfect
Yep.
life. And she was dealing with that.
Yeah. And it's scary, So I know that we have a different stance on whether you speak out or whether you don't, right? So I feel as though sometimes people think if you speak out, first of all, you're not weak if you don't speak out, but there's, I know you were mentioning there's certain times when you do or you don't want to speak out.
I think that sometimes it is physically safer for someone to stay until they have the right plan and the right timing. Statistically, the most dangerous time for a woman the most dangerous time for a woman in a domestic violence relationship is when she leaves. When you hear of these murders, actually, Gabby Petito, had she broken up with him? I might be wrong on that one, but statistically, when a woman is leaving, she's much more likely to be murdered.
Right.
And that is a
Well,
reality.
they did separate them. I think they
You're
sent them to
right.
different, they had her sleep in her van for that night, the police officer, and they brought him to a hotel, which I thought was
Yeah.
interesting. But they did mention that they ended up communicating and getting back together.
Yeah.
Even though
Yeah,
they were
that's
told to
right.
separate. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that that is a real consideration. And another consideration, and I think this is absolutely valid. I had a client, and I've had a number of clients in this situation, but one of my favorite previous clients was a man, actually, and had been in this extremely toxic marriage for over 20 years. And the wife wasn't abusive to him, but was physically abusive to the kids.
Oh,
And I asked him, why did it take you so long to divorce her? Because they've been miserable this whole time. And
right.
he said, I knew if I divorced her, she'd be alone with the kids. If I stayed
Oh.
married to her, the kids will never be alone with her.
Because there is a tendency, I've seen some cases where people automatically assume that the dad is going to be the one on the outs or the bad parent. But I've seen a lot of cases in Georgia where you hear about the mom was an alcoholic or in drugs or physically abusive, but they're given more primary care to the kids.
Yeah, and
or with the kids.
that was his fear. But also the reality, and at least in Georgia, is if there's physical abuse between the parents, the courts typically don't limit the abuser's parenting time. I've heard judges,
Really?
yes, I have heard judges say just because he was abusive to the wife does not mean he's going to be abusive to the kids.
Wow.
Yes. So, and that's why I do think that there are situations where genuinely staying can make sense. Because if you know that it is not safe for the kids to be around this person,
Yeah.
and you know that if you leave this person, the kids are going to be alone.
Yeah.
And I understand staying for your kids in that scenario. So it's complicated. I think that's just like, it's
Yeah.
complicated. And I don't know if we're like skipping way on, but I think that that's why one of the most important things for a woman in this situation is to go to a domestic violence resource.
Yeah.
And so in my experience, there are some really great local domestic violence resources. And a lot of the times they are working with my client as we're going through the process legally. And what I've learned is that, you know, I know the legal side of it, but these people who work in these programs, they know the statistics. They know
Yep.
when is it safest to leave, when is it safer to just hunker down and stay put.
Right.
They can help you put a safety plan in place that it's real practical stuff,
Yeah.
like always have, you know, your passport in your purse, or always have your car keys where
Yep.
you can grab them. You know, hiding things on your cell phone as far as, you know, contacts and information.
And really identify a friend in your life I feel like you can trust. I think it becomes difficult for people to not want to always tell their family members. I've seen this a lot where, you know, they're just going to get flack from their family members saying, oh, well, I hate him anyways. That's not really supportive. You need to find somebody, one person in your life who you can say, hey, I'm trying to make a plan and need your help. Because I've heard many scenarios too where they're trying to save money and that partner has access to everything.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of narcissists out there. I know a lot of people like to throw that title on everybody, but there really is truth in that rather. I've heard a great tip from a friend of mine that I tried to share with somebody else is like when you're making purchases with the debit card, I think you can just do the cash back and it won't show that on
Or buy
there.
Visa gift cards, like at the grocery
Yes,
store when
yes.
you're going through the checkout, just add $10, $15 gift card.
Right.
And you can even have that trusted friend hang on
Hold
to the
on to
gift
the
cards
money.
or hang on to the cash. Like,
That's exactly what I was
yes.
going to say, because these really truly abusive relationships, they're going to find the ways, in every which way you think you can hide it, they will find it.
Yeah. And that's
Mhm.
what's so great about these resources is they
Buy the
just
expensive
know it.
handbags, like that's another thing too. So many women want to keep up this image, but you know what? If you're with a partner that has the money to spend on that, like use it as your little egg to then sock away and return things and keep them off the side. But
Yeah.
there are ways. And I think that's a lot of things, like, us being in our midlife, we're looking at everything that we've built and our wealth and knowing that it's scary to think that that can all go away if you leave your relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that women who are financially dependent have to start planning and figuring out.
Right.
And it's scary when you're in an abusive relationship. They're not going to be supportive of you going to college
Right.
or
Like something's going to seem up. But I think that's where women need to find a plan and really start thinking about that sooner on than not.
yes, because your exit can take a very long time to plan.
Yeah. So, what are some of the lengths of time that you've seen people go through
I
this?
mean, God, I've seen people stay in a marriage for 20 years
Right.
and then decide to leave.
Right.
But, thinking of some other situations, I've had clients who wanted to leave from the time they decided I need to leave. I've seen it take 12 months, maybe
Wow.
more, of them having to take little baby steps
Uh huh.
to safely be able to exit.
Yeah. So, with that, like, if somebody decides that they want to make an exit from an abusive relationship, what are the steps that they should follow?
And my biggest thing is go to one of these domestic violence resources, like a
Yeah.
domestic violence
I don't
center.
even think I realized that existed, honestly, because
Really?
I wasn't in that situation. I'm sure it existed back then with my mom.
Yeah. Maybe
And
maybe not. I don't
I
know if
feel like
they're
it's one
new.
of those things that people just don't talk often enough about it, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of topics that it's there's a lot of shame around it, and you never think that you're going to be that one in that situation, and then you are.
Yeah. So when I have a client who goes to one of these domestic violence resources, and really this is even before they're a client, if a woman goes to one of these resources, the first thing that my understanding is that they will do is create the safety plan. The
Mm,
safety plan can be, here's what we're going to do for you to leave, or it can be, how are we keeping you safe while you're staying in this relationship,
right.
figuring it out. And they will also a lot of times help walk you through that temporary protective order process.
Okay.
And sometimes they'll help you fill out all the
Because the
paperwork.
temporary protective order process means that this person is going to be removed from the home. Is that
Yes.
right? Right.
Yes.
I remember you explaining that to me before.
Yes. And there are two steps to it. And of course, I only know Georgia,
Mhm.
but a lot of times the Family Violence Center will help with that first step as
Mhm.
far as filling out the documents, getting it in front of the judge, and then the judge issues, it's called ex parte, meaning the other side doesn't even know about it. If the
Oh.
judge thinks that you have probable cause, so basically this
Hmm.
low level of proof, the judge will issue this order. That order is served, and that means that person's out of the house immediately.
Yeah.
But a big problem, like I brought up before, is that's only a piece of paper. So that's
Exactly.
something, a lawyer can help you get the TPO as far as that second step of the big hearing.
Yeah.
But these domestic violence resources can help you know what steps to take to keep yourself as safe as possible
Hmm.
once that TPO is even in place. And the things I know, there's going to be things that I don't even know, but like, getting the Ring doorbell, having
Yeah.
cameras. I don't know if they recommend having a gun. I don't know, but it's things that they need to think about as far as like, what do I need to do
Right.
to keep myself safe if they choose to violate this protective order? And I know that these domestic violence centers, they'll know statistics as far as like,
Sure.
do you need to have a weapon? What kind of weapon? Like,
And then, of course, that varies from state to state and
yeah,
everything.
and exactly. So that's why they're really the best resource to walk you through exactly what do you need to do.
Yeah. So I think like as people can be unfiltered friends and the type of support that they can offer, I think the biggest thing is to not judge somebody when they come to you for help.
Yeah.
You never think that you're going to end up in a situation, and then you are. So to be able to be really a supportive soundbite for that person, but also not pressuring them to leave, because there are so many elements to it. And I originally was thinking like people should speak up. And then you brought up that other side about, well, yes, but also it really is difficult.
Just depending on the situation, right?
Yeah.
It's so specific to what exactly you're going through. What is the profile of the person that you're with?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, as a friend, to help research and provide resources, I think it's really important. And we're going to put all these in the show notes too. But I think, you know, in closing out here, we've covered a lot, and this is a topic that we can really go a lot more in because you've got a lot of experience in this. But I was going to say, like, standing up doesn't always need to be a grand speech, right? So that's really something. And while it's always best to get out of it sooner than later, you still have so much more of your life to live. And thinking that you're going to stick around in an abusive relationship for the sake of your kids is not the right answer.
Yeah.
It's really just not. So, yeah, I think that I have an empowering quote here that I listed out, and it says by Carl Jung, it's, "I'm not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." So even though somebody might be going through something difficult, you still have the ability to reinvent yourself and the rest of your life to live, because there's a lot to cover there. So I think like we like to close out with a moment of gratitude. And I will say that because I didn't realize I was going to get so emotionally touched with this episode, but my moment of gratitude is, now I'm getting emotional again, is that I really am thankful that growing up around so much abuse, that I was not impacted and didn't choose that same path. And then I'm choosing something better for my daughter, because I saw a lot. Make sure to keep listening and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you're listening to your podcasts. Follow us on social media at A Holistic Dose on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube for more fun, and visit our website at aholisticdose.com for behind the scenes and additional content. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back next week with more unfiltered friend talk right here on A Holistic Dose.
See you next time.